My name is Patrick Coffin, and I host a podcast that drops every Tuesday, known as The Patrick Coffin Show. I also co-run a membership site called Coffin Nation. It's a community of amazing people in over 20 countries who are beyond fed up watching the culture spiral down the drain. Today, I want to talk about Yuri Bezmenov, also known as Thomas Schumann. I know these names don't ring a bell, but I think as things get worse in America and around the world, he's going to become famous. I hope so. So to keep you ahead of the curve, here is why. Yuri Bezmenov was raised in a Soviet military family. His father was a high-ranking officer in the Soviet army during and after World War II. Young Yuri ended up rising in the ranks of the KGB, where he became an operative and an informant in India. Having seen the evil and the corruption of Soviet-style communism up close in his own life, and after an intense inner struggle, in the early 70s, he made a fateful decision to leave the infiltration work that he was doing in India on behalf of his bosses in Moscow, and he defected to the United States. He ended up living in Canada, mainly in Windsor, Ontario, and for a short time in Montreal, using the alias name Thomas Schumann until his death in 1993. Now, if Mr. Bezmenov had defected from the United States to the Soviet Union, Robert DeNiro or Tom Hanks or Tommy Lee Jones or Tim Robbins, one of those, would have gotten an Oscar for playing him in the movie about his life, and he'd be a household name. Not so much in real life. I first learned about this ex-KGB operative turned freedom fighter from an interview that he did with G. Edward Griffin in 1984 titled "Deception Was My Job." See the link below for that interview. Quick sidebar. Mr. Griffin will also be appearing on the podcast in a couple of weeks. So if you understand and appreciate the concept of red pilling, you will not want to miss it. End of sidebar. Although Bezmenov has been dead almost 30 years, he plays, I believe, a providential role in teaching people in the West, let's call it the Anglo-American establishment, all about the psychological operations, or the psyops, of the communist leadership that are now centered not so much in Russia as in China. But in the end, it's all the same Marxism. It's the same forced redistribution of wealth. It's the same empty promises of heaven on earth. It's the same collectivism, the same goals for the removal of individual rights and the worship of God, from whom all these rights flow. Bezmenov says that the strategy of Marxism, honed over the years under Joseph Stalin's killing machine, involves 4 stages of subversion. And by subversion, he points out, he doesn't mean blowing up pretty bridges or destroying railway lines. What he means by that is a war of ideologies, the slow and steady brainwashing that slowly undermines and then can take over a targeted foreign country. So here are the 4 stages. Number 1, demoralization. Number 2, destabilization. Number 3, crisis. And the final 4th stage is normalization. The first stage, demoralization, takes between 15 to 20 years to complete. Now, this is more or less the timeline that spans a single generation of students. The use of academic institutions and the media industrial complex are critical for demoralization. Already by 1984, Yuri Bezmenov said, and I quote, "Marxist-Leninist ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism," unquote. According to him, Marxist ideologues were overachievers, and that not even Comrade Andropov, the former head of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, could have dreamed of such success in which the demoralization, quote, "was done by Americans to Americans, thanks to the lack of moral standards," unquote. The second stage, destabilization, is aimed at economic calamities and in dividing the population against itself. This stage, he says, takes between 2 to 5 years and also involves attacking people's faith in the very foundations of their country and lacking of faith in each other. This takes on many forms, including snitching and neighbors turning in neighbors if they break the rules. Yes, this is exactly what's happening with the Corona doom hysteria. Anyone who questions the unconstitutional lockdowns, the completely arbitrary and enforced social distancing rules, and the imposition of literally worthless facial diapers, they're called grandma killers and anti-science nuts that need to be dealt with. not by some Stasi secret police, but by your friends and neighbors. The term divide and conquer became a cliche for a reason. All for a disease with an over 99% recovery rate that afflicts the same population demographic as a bad flu season. By so effectively dividing the population one against the other, the oligarchs have instrumentalized the corona doom hysteria on behalf of the third stage, number 3, crisis. Crisis is the point of collapse, and Bezmenov says it can take as little as 6 weeks. Once a nation has been demoralized and destabilized, in other words, so brainwashed that they reach a level of fear and chaos, so that at that point, folks will happily renounce their individual rights and freedoms for the sake of being rescued from the threat of the enemy, the trauma of the crisis. And who's going to do the rescuing? Yes, the same elites that brought about the crisis. And once the crisis is hatched and executed, the fourth stage is known as normalization. According to Bezmenov, the term normalization was coined by Leonid Brezhnev in the late 1960s after Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia. Normalization is aimed at enforcing what the new regime wants, normalizing the crazy. Censorship, ritual shaming, and the establishment of social credit to keep dissenters in line. It's really interesting how Bezmenov's words about then Democratic presidential candidate Walter Mondale in 1984 apply even more powerfully today to Joe Beijing. He said, and here's the quote, "This will happen in the United States if you allow all the schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kinds of goodies and a paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are even fulfillable or not." Unquote. Well, thanks be to God, a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan put a stop to that. But it wasn't stopped entirely, but postponed. Marxism is all about the long game. It's an intergenerational plan. So today you have Democratic governors like Minnesota's Tim Walz insisting that the corona doom means that Americans are required to accept the new normal. There it is again. Same message from Dr. Tony Fauci. Same from every media outlet on earth. At least in this country, they're wholly owned subsidiaries of the Democratic Party. Now, with his promises to cancel billions of dollars of debt to naive college students, Bernie Sanders makes Walter Mondale look like a John Bircher. And of course, there's the environmentalist analog here. That's the Marxist Green New Deal of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she only has 12 years to pull it off before it's curtains for the earth. Let me close with a quote from a prophetic poem that's getting a lot of attention now. It's by William Butler Yeats. It's called The Second Coming. This poem was written just after the massive Spanish flu epidemic, after the end of the First World War, called the Great War, absurdly known as, at the time, the war to end all wars. Here's how it opens. "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." I tend to think that right now in early 2021, we are well into the second stage and getting closer and closer to the third stage of crisis. Love to hear your comments in the comment box below. Where do you think we are in all these 4 stages of infiltration laid out by the former KGB operative Yuri Bezmenov, or even whether you think this commie talk is even a thing? Keep in touch, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and in the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?